If I had been born into a just world, I wouldn't have been born at all. At the very least, I would have been extinguished as soon as I came into the world, while I was still soft and weak. My survival was an anomaly. The existence of beings like myself was condemned by law, and yet I exist. Money must have exchanged hands. Teacher had always been quite wealthy. I still remember lying in fine silks, surrounded by soft mountains of plush toys when I was very young. I remember silver bells and soft-footed servants, and all kinds of expensive meals at our extensively long table. I would eat on one end, teacher would eat on the other. There was never anybody else with us, but that was good. The silence suited me. It suited the both of us. I am the best of teacher's creations. There were a few of us, but I was never sure how many. The house we lived in was huge, and I wasn't always formally introduced. Sometimes I would go to the nursery and there'd be a crib, with a lovely new addition to our family, waving however many arms or legs it had at me from its lacy little cage. I loved them the best when they were like this. I would wave back and tickle them, and play with them and tell them about all the many lessons I would have. They would just smile and gurgle back at me, not comprehending but still engaging. The older siblings kept to themselves mostly. They had their own rooms and were too poorly formed to be allowed to wander the halls like I was. We had had accidents with our servants encountering them in the past. A few of our halls still held the rusty stains as proof. They wouldn't stay for long. Sometimes the numbers on the door would be erased or switched out with new ones. I tried to initiate a game with one of the others once when it escaped. Just a simple card game. It was a sibling that was a couple years younger than me, the third longest lasting. I had found it in the sunroom, chewing its nails and pawing at the many out-of-place wrinkles on its face. I didn't know whether it was a brother or a sister. Teacher didn't really bother with that sort of thing for anybody but me. I approached it that day when I was particularly bored and I placed a deck in front of them. They stared at them and then back at me, twisting an already twisted face into something more grotesque, something I couldn't describe. I shouldn't have been surprised when they lunged at me. I should have fought them off, I know, but I didn't feel the urge. I laid underneath them, frozen while their teeth tore at my neck. I could see my dark blood seeping into my nice white shirt, staining my siblings' teeth with a viscous umber coating. It was hard to watch, given the angle, but I did. I was almost disappointed when the servant pulled them off of me and I was taken away to the infirmary. The teacher took one look at my ruined body and he shook his head. He dipped his finger into my blood and rubbed it between his fingers, frowning. My most major flaw, spreading across his tiles with every pump of my heart. He muttered a few other things as he picked up my weakening body and he took me to his lab for repairs. He had always had this problem with me. Too slow to wake, sluggish reaction time, temperature too low. But the one that bothered me the most was the darkness of my blood. When it dried, it was jet black, like my hair and my eyes. The sludge in my pipes was the result of a faulty system. No being is perfect, but I am supposed to be. An improvement of the piecemeal game that is genetics and random human breeding. I was supposed to advance civilization, not bleed my black blood over the deck of cards. Maybe I should have offered them something else, at least, but the point is moot. That sibling is gone now. Thinking of it makes the scars on my neck itch, so I don't dwell on it. One afternoon while teacher was out attending a conference, I snuck into his lab. I saw essentially what I had expected to see. Glass tubes full of future and former siblings, body parts growing independently in tanks, a huge industrial tub labeled bioscrap. A classic chalkboard full of metabolic pathways stood next to a giant computer, running calculations too complex for an organic mind. A bust of Hippocrates, teacher's hero, looming over the whole mess like an impassive god. I honestly don't know why I bothered to look. I knew that this is where I was born. I knew that this is where I would die. I imagined myself, after too much dark bleeding and disappointing behavior, lying at the top of the bioscrap heap, waiting to be repurposed. I took one last look around, then I shut the door. I never bothered to go back to the lab after that. Our house was in the woods, far away from the prying eyes of other people. The government had graciously let Teacher live with his children in peace for the price of complete and total insulation. Not a steep price by any means. We were not a social family. The forest surrounding our house was deep and thick, with choking underbrush and densely packed trees that would keep away any interlopers. At dawn, during mornings soft and wet after being birthed from night, I would slip out of the house and lie on the grass, soaking my soaked nightgown in the dew. I watched for animals before I was found and forced back inside to go to my morning lessons. I would often spot a family of rabbits that lived nearby, and I would hear a bird song, but otherwise the woods were very still. Once I had found a baby rabbit that had wandered too far from the warren. I picked it up gently in my hands and I held it as it squealed, its tiny heart fluttering lightly against my palm. I didn't particularly like the sound, so I squeezed, and the fluttering stopped. Later I realized that that was a very bad thing to do. On some level I understood it, but I didn't feel it. I left the body on the lawn and I saw a fox snatch it up some time after tea. Teacher berated me for killing the rabbit, but in secret. I would praise myself for feeding the fox. When I had told Teacher this one day, after a math lesson, he frowned in that special, contemplative way, the way he frowned before one of my siblings disappeared. I lay awake that night out of pure indignation, listening to the distant animal cries and screams of the night and pacing, willing myself to function to my fullest capacity before I could no longer do so. I tried to imagine not existing anymore, picturing a vast and endless space of cold, dark nothing. I remember reading about tundras, and I thought that death must be like a tundra and the melancholic black of night. I concentrated on the image and the sensation of a windy chill on my skin, until I crawled back into my bed and my thoughts dissolved into sleep. And the next morning, Teacher sat at his end of the table, a slip of paper in one hand and a cup of freshly made coffee in the other. And the slip of paper was an acceptance letter to Judith Monlowe's School for Girls, and the coffee was Colombian. He explained to me that I'd be able to come home anytime I wanted, but he felt like it was time for me to be amongst humans. I was, he said, supposed to be one, or at least a stunning approximation of one. I asked him when I was due to leave, and in about 4 hours, I had a suitcase in one hand and a thermos of tea in the other. The suitcase was my entire life. The tea was Earl Grey. The school was, quite surprisingly, not very far. It only took an hour and a half to get there by car. I had somehow assumed that our house occupied another plane of existence, and that it would take years to get anywhere even remotely resembling Earth. But it was only a 45-minute drive from the nearest mall. It was the first of my illusions to be shattered. It wouldn't be long until my mind was littered with glass. We arrived at the huge, dark iron gates at around noon. The bars were thick, heavy, and darker than my blood. And the school beyond the gates was a beautiful place, almost as beautiful as our house, lacking only the familiarity that gave any place a personal sort of glow. The gothic red brick buildings were covered in mosses and vines, and I saw girls walking around in neat, navy blue uniforms. They were chatting and giggling with each other. Laughter, how strange. I'd only heard it from time to time, from Teacher and some of the suited men. I liked the sound of it and the way it looked when it lit up somebody's face, but I wasn't sure how to use it properly. I thought the fox carrying the rabbit away warranted at least a little laughter, but according to Teacher, that was not the case. We met briefly with the headmistress, a wide woman with a thin smile, who welcomed me to the campus and promised Teacher that I would fit right into the academy. I looked at her sallow face and bright hair, touched the coils of my own hair, and I wondered about that. She seemed the type to lie. All humans seemed like that to me, so it could have just been my biases talking. After Teacher and the headmistress had finished talking, The teacher patted my head in a rare moment of affection. He walked out of the door without a word, leaving me to stare after him while the headmistress gripped my shoulder, as if to keep me from running away. She didn't need to worry. I saw the look on my sibling's face as it was dragged away from me, blood like melted chocolate dribbling down his chin. I know the price of disobedience. The headmistress took me to a small room with white walls and 2 small blue beds. She assured me that I'd be matched with a roommate by the end of the week. I would have told her not to bother, but she was out of the door in a flash, leaving behind a schedule in her wake. I chose the bed closest to the window, but when I looked out, all I could see was the sprawl of the campus. No trees, no cute little songbirds, rabbits, and foxes. Just an expanse of girls that I was supposed to blend into. I hoped that I could. I wanted to do more than hope, but it was all that I could manage. Praying was not an option for me. The first week passed by in a daze. I was made to stand in front of my English class and introduce myself. And for the first time in my life, I said my own name, Angelina. It fell off my tongue and landed on the floor with a wet splat, and my classmates giggled at my mishandling of what was supposed to be mine. But my name was like a gift from some distant relative that sat gathering dust on some high shelf. I took a window seat near the back and I listened to the droll lesson that seemed to last the entire day, even though the class was let out in less than an hour. None of my classmates even glanced my way after we were dismissed. And this happened in math, history, home economics, science, and lunch. Rinse and repeat. Introductions with no response. A performance for no audience. Isolation is fine when you're alone, but loneliness in numbers would have crushed my soul if I'd had one. Something else happened instead. I was sitting on the bench by myself at lunch, eating a sandwich and reading a book. I had never attempted to talk to any of the other girls, and the risk of embarrassment was far too great. My strange personality was already a lively topic of conversation, and I didn't want to add to it with any conversational awkwardness on my part. A few girls passed by where I was eating, one giving me a sidelong glance as they passed. Once they were a few feet away, the girl who looked leaned towards one of her companions and said, "She's such a freak, right?" I stopped eating. The half-chewed sandwich tasted like wet clay in my mouth. I was used to their rejection, so I'd assumed that their cruelty, when I did encounter it, would be easy to bear. But the tightening of my throat and the churning of my stomach told otherwise. I threw away the rest of my lunch and I rushed to the bathroom, holding my mouth as I ran. I had never thrown up in my life. I knew what it was having witnessed it happen to a sibling or two, but I never had the problem myself. But I could feel the contents of my stomach threatening to expel themselves from my body, so I dashed into the girls' bathroom and I leaned over the toilet, trying to steel myself for the worst. What came out was not what I expected. I started wheezing and then hacking, and after some time, several clumps of what seemed like soot floated in the water before me. It was awfully dry and cake-like, and it felt cold all over after I was done, the aftertaste of graphite lingering in my mouth. I sank to my knees, all my energy spent from the effort of retching. And peering into the bowl again, I realized that there wasn't a trace of my sandwich in the murk. Whatever I had coughed up, it wasn't from my stomach. I considered going home, returning to my precious woods and my honored teacher, but I resolved to stay. This would be my own personal test. I would prove that I was the epitome of ingenuity, in some way or another. I could already hear my teacher's praise, and the imagined sound of it brought me to my feet again. My relationship with my peers only worsened as time went on. Snide whispers grew closer, more careless, until girls were essentially insulting me to my face. My dark eyes, my wild hair, my annoying know-it-all attitude, and my frequent sprints to the bathroom are all popular subjects. I never reacted in front of them, choosing to remain as cold as I ever had, but too many slights at once would send me sprinting down the hall again, coughing up that mysterious substance. I collected a sample and I crept into the science lab one night to study it, but I could find nothing conclusive. It was some sort of biological tissue. an amalgam of extracellular tissues and dead, broken cells, but nothing that I could recognize. After a few nights of frustration, I sent a sample to the teacher in hopes that his more powerful instruments could determine what it was. While I waited for his response, the abuse escalated. One girl dumped a carton of milk all over my lunch. I was tripped in the halls often on my way to and from lunch. One girl even wrote "freak" on my desk before math, although the misspelling took much of the sting out of that particular slight. But sting it did, still. My teachers would just frown and shake their heads in sympathy when I was finally moved to complain, but hollow acknowledgement was the most I ever got. Other girls looked at me in sympathy, and some even offered a kind word every now and again, but they were empty gestures as well. As soon as I was being teased or berated, any support was seized, and I was left to suffer alone. I was drowning in a tar pit of teenage contempt, and no one wanted to help me out of fear of being sucked in too. I began to see why teacher worked so hard on creating his children. If this was the future of humanity, then there needed to be an alternative. The content of my vomit changed over time. The dry clumps began to moisten and turn into more of a chunky liquid. It was still pitch black and metallic, and it scored my throat like regular bile would. Each session would end in me shaking with exhaustion, but after some time, I began to notice something very interesting. I was getting stronger. I started jumping over the feet of the girls who tried to trip me. When a girl tried to shove me aside with her shoulder in the hall, I shoved her back, slamming her into a locker. The glares that I used to wilt under, I now returned with vengeance. Soon, I began to look away. The whisperings in the halls receded, and I walked unimpeded from class to class as I felt the stares at my back. I had not gained any love, but I have gained something better. Fear. And the knowledge made me happier than I had been in months. Wait until I told teacher about my success. My dominance would surely earn his praise. And then this little experiment would be over. I'd be back in the woods, having lessons that mattered and whirling the time away as I pleased. Teacher called me one day, about 3 months into the semester. By that time, my vomiting had decreased, so I was inducing it, suffering through the pain and weakness to feed off the strength that emerged from its ashes. The bile itself is almost clear, peppered with flecks of the blackness that had once made up its entirety. I convinced myself that if I rid myself of the last of those black flecks, I would become the perfect creation my father wanted me to be. In killing the rabbit, I would feed the fox that came in instead. But teacher's voice over the phone was grim and uncertain.
You must stop this at once. You were unbalanced before, true, but now the scale is tipping in the other direction. When you come home for holiday, I'll ensure your proper balance is restored.
I answered him meekly, agreeing that it was wrong, but inside, I was boiling. How dare he? Did he think that he knew my body better than I just because he created it? I inhabited it. I knew its trails and passages, its peaks and valleys, the flesh containing the liquids churning within me. My temperaments were mine and mine alone to control. What did he know about my strength? What could he know about my power? I hung up the phone after a good goodbye and I walked down the hall, determined to ignore his advice. I already knew what I needed to do. I lived in a different world now, and its navigation would be up to me and me alone. Humans do not only fear power, and they're attracted to it. The fear lasted for a while and it was still there in many forms, but slowly I began to receive admiration. Sometimes girls would come up to me during lunch and ask me about my classes or compliment my hair. At first, I stared them down until they let me be, but soon I saw that I could use it to my advantage. After all, weren't humans social creatures? I would prove that I was a success by making friends, or if not friends, then at least allies. I would answer the girls that flocked to me, and soon I had a nice little gaggle trailing in my wake. They did me all manner of favors, and like sipping me copies of tests, and giving me the choicest parts of their lunches. And after they dispersed and I was left to my own devices, I would complete my daily ritual. 2 slender fingers down the throat. Kill the rabbit, feed the fox. And by the end of the semester, I was equal parts goddess and Faria. Students and teachers were either under my sway, bowing and fetching, or out of it, plotting and scheming. I was a cleric whirlwind, and everybody knew it. I was ferocious in the classroom and outside of it. I took no insult lying down, and any girl who dared to cross me would pay for it very dearly. Vandals took markers to doors and homework turned up mysteriously shredded. And whenever I was asked who was responsible, and I was without fail every time, I would just shrug and smile, knowing nothing could be pinned on me. It wasn't like I was even doing half of it. No wonder humans were such social animals. Having friends had so many wonderful benefits. It was a pity I hadn't made any before. On the Thursday before Christmas break, I faced my final test. I was walking to the bathroom to complete my ritual, alone for a rare moment, when several girls swarmed from my classroom and blocked my path. I suspected that they had noticed my patterns and were waiting for an opportunity to trap me. And their leader, a girl named Anna, stepped forward, sneering at me. She was a well-muscled girl with large, thick hands and 2 red braids resting on her chest. She was one of the ones who had picked on me before my sudden surge in popularity, and I didn't blame her for it. She couldn't help it. The poor, weak-minded thing. I understood and I didn't sympathize. Of course, but I understood. Well, if it isn't Galena, you really are special, aren't you? You're the only girl in the school who can crap out of her mouth. The other girls tittered at the joke, and I laughed along too. It was a little funny and even a little bit true. Anna scowled at me. Since you don't understand how things work around here, we thought we might give you a little after-school lesson. Anna grinned and held up a framed picture of Teacher and I. I froze. How had she gotten that? Nobody else lived with me. No one else was even allowed in my room. Though my feelings for Teacher had cooled, my rage at my space being violated was all-consuming. My emotions must have bled out of my face, because Anna's smile grew wider and more cruel. Ah, does little Galena love her little family picture? She cooed, waving it carelessly in front of me. With no warning, she threw it to the ground. The glass broke with a sickening crack and she stomped on it a few times for good measure. When she was finally done, she carefully excavated the picture from the ruined frame and tore it slowly, agonizingly, into 8 separate pieces, staring at me while she did it. Her grin seemed to grow wider and wider, wider than was even possible. I stood still, stock still, as if I had been taxidermied and my veins were filled with hard plastic instead of blood. I felt my stomach churn, a natural feeling of nausea that I hadn't felt in months. The bile came up naturally this time, spilling from my mouth before I could stop it. It splashed at my feet like water, completely clear and only slightly viscous. There wasn't a black fleck in sight. It was gone. All of it was gone and I was left with nothing but a hot, angry, dry rage. The feeling burned at the core of my being, heat spreading through my limbs until I felt the tips of my fingers and toes go numb. At this time, I had been becoming something different, something new, something other than human or even the creature I was before. I was someone, or something that had never existed on this earth before, and I was something that would endure nothing. I don't really know whether Anna made fun of me for throwing up. It didn't matter. I lunged forward and she was dead before she hit the ground, neck twisted backwards at a gruesome angle. The girl standing directly behind her stared at her body dumbly, mouth hanging open in shock. Her jaw was on the ground and her throat was open with one well-placed hug. And by this time, the other girls had come back to their senses. Some screamed and one began to cry. The smart one ran. I was impressed with her. I dispatched the others before I got to her. She deserved to survive the longest, but not that much longer. I was raw and dripping by the time I was finished. The girls all lay where they had fallen, eyes empty and staring. I ignored the bodies and I walked to the bathroom, stepping over limp limbs and patches of blood. I stared at the image of the mirror, feeling pleased. My whites of my eyes could hardly be called whites anymore, yellow as they were. Starbursts of red blood decorated the corners of my eyes. My hair and my skin were the same, but there was a new glow, a new kiss of vitality that set my whole body on fire. I laughed and I touched the mirror, letting the blood streak the glass. Teacher would be coming for me soon. So would the men in their cars and suits. I'm sure they would think that I had failed in my mission, but that was their folly. I have a new purpose. I am a new purpose. The rabbit is dead. I am the fox.